Okay, we're ready to go. Yes, we are. And now I believe we will be hearing from OER, the Office of Energy Resources.
OER calls Dr. Ellen Cool.
Yes, and also we were asked to clarify that indeed the oath of office only carries through to the end of the particular case in which you are. I think that's actually an emergency alarm.
Or it could be a flash. Yeah, that's right. It could be a text report.
Let's just hope it's not a tornado. No, it's in Indiana. A thing.
That would be perfect.
Some kind of news incident. Can I just give you a
I have to apologize about our sound system is, as you can tell, not just bad, it's also old. We're trying to get it replaced. Better streaming. So far, we just keep getting new batteries.
Okay.
That actually was a flash flood warning alert.
Dr. Cool, could you state your full name for the record, please?
Ellen Cool.
And who are you employed by?
I'm employed by Levitan Associates Incorporated, and my business address is 100 Summer Street, Boston, Massachusetts.
And what is your job title there?
My title there is Vice President and Principal.
And on whose behalf are you testifying here today?
I'm testifying on behalf of the Office of Energy Resources.
And did you assist the Office of Energy Resources in the drafting of its advisory opinion dated September 12, 2016?
Yes, I did.
And did you assist the Office of Energy Resources in the drafting of its supplemental advisory opinion dated February 26, 2016?
Yes.
Are you here today to sponsor those advisory opinions on behalf of the Office of Energy Resources?
Yes, I am.
On behalf of the Office of Energy Resources, did you work in collaboration with the statewide planning program to draft a portion of the statewide planning program's advisory opinions related to the state energy plan?
Yes, I did.
Are you here today to answer questions about the state energy plan portion of statewide planning program's opinions on behalf of OER?
Yes.
Did you file pre-file testimony in this case?
I did.
And for the record, that's OER Exhibit 1. Did you have a chance to review your pre-filed testimony since it's filed?
I did.
And do you have any corrections?
I do not.
And do you adopt your pre-filed testimony as your testimony here today?
Yes, I do.
Do you have a copy of OER's supplemental advisory opinion in front of you?
I do.
Could you turn to page 19, section 5?
I have that in front of me.
Could you read OER's findings, please?
On page 19?
Yes.
Sure. OER finds that despite a potential delay in commercial operation date, the facility will contribute to reducing CO2 emissions associated with electricity used in Rhode Island, which is derived from generating resources across New England, as well as imports from neighboring regions. However, CREC's contribution to reducing regional emissions is likely to diminish over time. Development and operation of the project will not hinder Rhode Island from meeting its GHG reduction targets under the Resilient Rhode Island Act. Development and operation of the project will not hinder the implementation of Rhode Island's clean energy policies, programs, and statutory initiatives.
Thank you. And do you agree with those findings as of today?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. The witness is available for cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Dr. Kuhl. My name is Jerry Elmer, and I represent Conservation Law Foundation. I want to start by asking a few questions about fuel diversity, which is discussed in the Energy 2035 plan. But before we look at the plan, would you agree with me that fuel diversity, as the name implies, means that we do not want to have an over-reliance on a single fuel source?
In very general terms, that would be the common usage of that term.
Instead, we want to have a diversity of fuel sources. Is that fair?
For system reliability, yes.
And when you are talking about system reliability, you're referring to the electricity grid in New England.
As well as imports into the region.
So looking now at the Energy 2035 Rhode Island State Energy Plan, on page 3,
I don't have a copy of the whole plan.
could we give Dr. Kuhl the exhibit that There you go. On page 3, and I'm referring to the Arabic numeral, in the middle of the page it says Part 2, in boldface, Part 2, Goals and Performance Measure Targets. You see that?
I do.
And under that heading there's a chart, and one of the things that's listed is increase fuel diversity in each sector above 2013 levels. Is that correct?
Is what it says, yes.
And you would agree with me that increasing fuel diversity is one of the goals that Rhode Island set forth in this Energy 2035 plan.
That's what is stated here.
Page 34. Once again, at the top of the page, in larger type font, it says Goals and Performance Measure Targets. And again, in the chart in the middle of the page, we have increased fuel diversity in each sector above 2013 levels. And that is a fair reflection of one of the goals that Rhode Island has in this Energy 2035 report. Is that correct?
Yes, I would also note that the targets are economy-wide, so fuel diversity could also be referring to other sectors of the economy as well.
And it would include the electricity sector among other sectors.
Electricity, transportation, and
Heating, home heating.
home business heating.
Yes. And just as you said, each sector, if you look at the top of page 38, Theme 1, Security, At the end of that paragraph in boldface type, it says increase fuel diversity in each sector, just as you said a moment ago. Is that right?
That's what it says on top of page 38, yes.
And would you agree with me that in the New England electricity market, natural gas is a very important fuel?
Natural gas, on average, produces a little under half of the electricity region-wide on an annual basis.
And in fact, natural gas is the marginal fuel about 78% of the time in New England. Isn't that correct?
I don't know if that is the correct number, but it is true. Natural gas is the marginal fuel in the majority of hours across the region.
And when we say marginal, we don't mean on the side or less important. We mean that in the hourly bid stack that the ISO creates, that's the last unit to be committed.
Yes, when you look at all the resources in what we call merit order, it's the last one or the most expensive one to be dispatched.
And that last marginal unit to be committed is the unit that sets price for that hour.
That's the price paid to all generators in that hour. It's the basis for the price paid to all generators in that hour.
Yes. And you would agree with me, subject to check, that in some shoulder months like May and October, gas is in fact the marginal unit more than 95% of the time.
I can't verify that number. There are hours, specifically off-peak hours on weekends in the shoulder months when some other resource might be on the margin. For example, nuclear could be on the margin in some of those hours. But I don't know the disposition of the hours off the top of my head.
Okay. In your expert opinion, will adding a new 1,000 megawatt gas-fired generator in Rhode Island help to diversify Rhode Island's electricity fuel mix?
Well, when you're talking about Rhode Island's fuel mix, are you talking about across all sectors? Are you talking about, again, what's being burned within Rhode Island? There are many ways of looking at it.
I was trying to avoid the pesky problem we had this morning of differentiating between consumption-based accounting and production-based accounting, which is why I worded the question that way. And then my next question is going to be the same question with regard to the New England electricity fuel mix. So the current question is, in your expert opinion, will adding a new 1,000 megawatt gas-fired generator in Rhode Island help to diversify Rhode Island's fuel mix?
Seeing as most of the generation within Rhode Island is now natural gas, I would agree it would be an additional natural gas plant in a state where most of the other generation is natural gas.
And that would not help diversify the fuel.
Well, that just says what capacity there is in the state. It does not say anything about the diversity of the fuel that's actually generating the electricity. So we have a different perspective there.
In your expert opinion, will adding a new 1,000 megawatt gas-fired generator in Rhode Island help to diversify the fuel mix represented in the ISO New England fuel mix?
Again, if you're talking about the capacity of resources within New England, there is a preponderance of natural gas capacity in New England, so it would be another natural gas plant in a region that has a lot of natural gas plants. It does not necessarily follow that it would change the fuel mix of what's actually generated from hour to hour.
But yes, so just to clarify for the board, you're distinguishing between the fuel mix on the energy side, what's actually burned hourly, and what the fuel mix is on the capacity side, which is what the aggregate of all generation in New England is. Is that right?
All generating capacity. capacity.
Right. And what you're saying is that building another gas plant would affect fuel diversity on the capacity side.
It would or would not?
You're saying it would, but not necessarily on the energy side, because you were saying this gas plant might displace production by another gas-fired generator.
On the capacity side, it would be an additional gas plant in a region that is heavily tilted toward natural gas capacity.
Yeah.
On the energy production side, natural gas, additional burning of natural gas would displace either other natural gas or some other fossil fuel.
So is it fair to say on the energy side that building another natural gas plant in New England will do nothing to help diversify the fuel mix?
Again, it depends on what your metrics are for diversity. And I'm not sure that the state guide plan has metrics for diversity. So in common parlance and just normal English, if I look up in the dictionary, I would agree. But there's no specific metrics that I'm aware of that apply to diversity here.
Okay. Let me direct your attention, if I may, to your pre-filed testimony, page 24.
Sorry, did you say 24?
Yes, page 24, and there's a discussion starting on page 11 that runs on to the next page. You say, as New England's generation fleet evolves and is modernized over time, with more efficient resources displacing and replacing less efficient generation resources, it is true that CREC may in the future be dispatched only sparingly by ISO New England. And in this case, when you say dispatched, you mean committed or turned on to be used.
Well, committed has a very special meaning in the ISO market. So
Yes.
let's just say it's given instructions to operate at a certain level.
Well, but here you say in the future it may be dispatched. The difference in the tariff between unit commitment and dispatch is that unit commitment is being turned on or off, and dispatch is being regulated up and down. Is that correct?
That's a good way to phrase it, yes.
Okay. So when you say it is true that CREC may in the future be dispatched only sparingly, you're saying it may be used somewhat less.
Yes.
Okay. Then you say at the top of page 25, there may be a point in time when revenues from the electricity markets administered by ISO New England are insufficient to cover CREC's fixed and variable operating costs, and CREC may decide to mothball or retire the plant. Is that right?
Yes.
And what you're saying here is that at a possible future time, if the plant becomes uneconomic, the owners may elect to shut it down. Is that right?
They may elect to shut it. They may elect to apply to the ISO to shut it down, and then the ISO will do an analysis and determine if by shutting it down it jeopardizes the reliability of the grid, and if the ISO determines that it does not, then they would shut it down.
But the initial request to file a non-price retirement or a static delist bid or a dynamic delist bid would be initiated by the resource owner, in this case Invenergy, and then would be ruled upon by the internal market monitor and the ISO.
That's correct.
Okay. And you would agree with me that there may be multiple market factors that could play into a complex decision by the resource owner as to whether or not the resource owner believes that the units continue to be economic. Is that right?
That would be correct.
For example, you would want to look at load patterns over time. That would be one factor.
Yes.
You want to look at the speed at which Casper, that is competitive auctions with state policy resources, was or was not successful in bringing new renewables into the market and having the retirement of old fossil units. That would be another factor.
Well, if Casper in fact goes forward, and as you know, it's being challenged right now, but if it does go forward, if the correct project is developed and does obtain a capacity supply obligation, either on its own merit or through the Casper process, then presumably it would remain as an existing resource and could continue to be an existing resource and collect capacity revenues, regardless of what happens to other resources.
I just want to check one thing. You weren't suggesting that the Invenergy project, which has a seasonal claim capability of 997 megawatts and is a primarily gas-fired generator, would be eligible to participate in this substitution auction?
No. You brought up Casper, so I thought you were talking about
Okay.
resources in general that might be affected by Casper, which would mostly be projects that have some sort of state policy support. So that's where I thought you were going.
Yeah, no, but all I'm saying is that the Casper construct, if approved, could be a factor in determining how long this unit, this resource is economically viable.
I'd have to think about that.
Okay. The level of deployment of behind-the-meter resources would have an influence on overall markets in New England.
It would affect load, yes.
Level of deployment of demand response would affect viability of fossil generators.
Yes.
Frequency with which RMR contracts, reliability must run contracts like the controversial ones for Mystic 8 and 9, will have a material impact on the market.
I don't know if we know if it's material, but certainly whether or not Mystic 8 and 9 retire at the end of their current capacity supply obligation, or if they receive an RMR to continue operating perhaps through May of 2024, would have an effect on the market in the short term.
Yeah. And let's put it this way. Some owners of large conventional resources believe that the Mystic 8 and 9 situation is sufficiently material that they're challenging those RMR contracts at FERC. Isn't that right?
Well, I think certain parties have an interest in challenging that.
And it's fair to say that different people can have different opinions as to how fast any of these various factors may influence the market and what that ultimate outcome may be.
I'm a consultant and I get paid to opine on those sorts of things or analyze those sorts of things in detail.
So your bread is buttered on the side of answering that question as yes.
No, that's not my answer. My bread, as a consultant, we analyze the information that's available. We do appropriate modeling. We don't have a predisposition or prejudgment as to the outcome.
But you're saying here in this section of your testimony that I was reading that there may be a point in time when revenues from the electricity markets are insufficient to cover CREC's fixed and variable operating costs, and CREC may decide to mothball or retire the plant.
Yes.
Yes. So for this hypothetical question, I want you to assume that CREC did not decide to mothball or retire the plant, although we recognize that that is possible. And for this question, assume that the plant is operating in 2050. What is your expert opinion of the impact that this power plant would have in the year 2050 on the ability of Rhode Island to reduce its carbon emissions by 80% over 1990 levels?
So you're asking me to assume that in 2050 the plant is still limping along for whatever reason. By that point it is, what, over 30 years old, right?
Well, so are you saying that if the plant is in existence in 2050, it's your view that the plant would be limping?
Well, let me finish. We know that Rhode Island, as well as other states in New England, have some very aggressive initiatives to bring on more renewable resources. Increasing penetration of solar, both utility scale and behind-the-meter solar. We all know about initiatives to bring on offshore wind, with the opportunities here in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and offshore. There are proposed contracts for something like 1,400 megawatts of offshore wind. If those contracts are approved and if those projects are built, offshore wind will become a sizable portion of the region's portfolio. When those projects are operational, let's assume it's 2050 and they are operational, and not only that, but another 800 megawatts or so is procured through the Massachusetts 83C initiative, then a large fraction of the region's electricity needs will be met by zero carbon resources, and those resources have basically zero fuel costs, so they'll be deep down in the merit order, and they'll be operating whenever the wind blows. And what that means is that those penetration of those resources, in addition to probably new HVDC cables from Canada, bringing zero carbon hydropower into New England. All those resources will displace fossil resource generation or fossil resource dispatch that's higher in the stack because they have significant fuel costs. So by displacement, gas-fired, certainly coal, certainly oil, that are much more costly, a much higher production costs will be pushed off the stack. And natural gas will, over time, also be pushed off the stack, but still be needed to the extent that Tesla doesn't invent or doesn't come up with a battery that's cost-effective, natural, quick ramping gas-fired resources may still be needed at that point to balance the generation of load. So the point is that with that much penetration of zero carbon resources, natural gas may simply be dispatched less at some point in the future, which would affect how CREC's revenue stream looks.
So, to respond to the question that you put to me, yes, I want you to assume all of those thousands of megawatts of new wind coming in that you described, all of that new solar, all of the separate additional transmission coming in under Massachusetts 83C, the new Hydro-Quebec connections that you were talking about. And then my question is, assuming all of that, what is your expert opinion of the impact that this power plant would have, if built, in the year 2050 on the ability of Rhode Island to meet its carbon emission reduction goal of 80% below 1990 levels by 2050?
Again, I think it will facilitate that by allowing for intermittent resources to operate fully.
Okay, thank you. just want to clarify for the sake of the board, when you use the phrase deep down in merit order, you were referring to renewables, you were talking about being lower on the bid stack, is that correct?
Yes, lower production cost.
And therefore committed by the ISO earlier, both day ahead and in real time. Is that correct?
Yes, they're basically self-scheduled resources in the sense that these intermittent resources are still required to put a bid in day ahead if they have a capacity supply obligation. But they'll either bid zero or they could even bid negative, and so they'll always be dispatched, they'll always be called on to run.
And it's true, isn't it, that wind resources under the ISO tariff approved by FERC are fully dispatchable in the real-time market today?
I'm not aware of that. I'm not saying I don't know, but I don't know that particular one.
Are you aware of the fact that most wind in New England are not, as you're suggesting, settlement-only resources under the tariff?
I know that from time to time the ISO can curtail wind output, and that sometimes happens in places like northern New England where the transmission system is not as robust as elsewhere. And so to avoid overloads on the transmission system, in places like northern Maine where the load is very low, but there may be wind resources, in order to preserve the safety and security of the system, the ISO might direct that resource to curtail.
Yes, but under the tariff, isn't it true that curtailment can be done of every resource, not only settlement-only generators?
I can't speak to that rule.
And you're not aware of the fact that currently under the tariff, wind resources are fully dispatchable in the real-time market. You're not aware of that.
I'm not saying it's not true, I just do not know that particular line in the tariff.
Okay. I have no further questions for this witness.
Thank you, Chairperson. Could I get a clarification? Is Dr. Cool coming back anymore, or is this our only opportunity? Says, if you may recall, during earlier questioning, there were a number of questions regarding economics of the project that would defer to Dr. Cool. Is today the day to ask them, or will it be another day for them? Yes.
Yes, that would be today.
Today, okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Cool. I'm Mike McElroy. I represent the town of Barville.
Good afternoon.
I noticed on your resume that you have acted as an advisor to the Connecticut DEEP and the Rhode Island DPUC on the clean energy RFP. That's, as you described it here, a regional procurement undertaken by Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island to procure long-term contracts for renewables, transmission, and large-scale hydro, correct?
That's correct.
Could you tell us what the status of that is?
The clean energy RFP concluded, I can't tell you the exact date, but when the contracts were announced, but the process concluded with the selection of a number of projects, including one wind farm located in New York that will commit to delivering energy and renewable energy credits into New England, as well as a handful of solar projects. Those contracts were executed with the electric distribution companies in all 3 states according to an apportionment formula, and then each of those contracts was subsequently brought up before the respective commissions in each state, and those contracts were approved.
About how many megawatts in total are we talking about?
I don't know the exact number. I'm
Ballpark.
going to guess ballpark 150 to 200 megawatts somewhere.
Would you agree with me that renewables are quickly penetrating the market?
Depends what you mean by quickly. I can say that in the ISO New England interconnection queue, renewables are the majority of the new projects that have queue positions and are waiting for interconnection studies to be undertaken and completed.
Would you agree with me, in an effort to give quickly a little bit more context, that renewables are currently penetrating the New England market faster than we thought they would in 2015?
It depends who was thinking that. I know that people that, some states back in 2015, including Rhode Island, including Connecticut, Massachusetts, already had in place very aggressive programs, and their respective legislatures had passed statutes that were intended to promote the build-out of new renewable resources through these kind of long-term contracts that are helpful in getting these projects financed. I shouldn't even say helpful, they're really essential to get
Sure.
these projects financed.
Well, what about ISO? If you look at what ISO was predicting about the penetration of renewables in 2015, would you say that renewables have penetrated more quickly than that?
I don't know what ISO has published back in 2015 about that.
All right, that's fair. Would you agree with me that to the extent renewables and hydro become part of the mix, that carbon will be reduced?
From the electric sector,
Yes.
yes. Carbon emissions would be reduced because with increasing penetration, we've displaced the dispatchable fossil resources on the margin.
And would you agree with me that the reduction would be significant?
Again, significant, yes, it would be measurable. And I think that Attorney Elmer brought up the ISO New England's annual electric generator air emissions report, and I've been tracking this over the last few years, and in fact the average emissions across New England on a pounds per megawatt hour basis have gone down. With 1 year was an exception, which was, I believe, the year that Vermont Yankee retired.
So on average, how much in recent years is the carbon emission number going down?
Annually, well, in one of the, either my testimony or the supplemental advisory opinion, I commented on what the change was from 1 year to the next, and pointed to that.
Well, it's certainly more than 1%, correct?
Yes. So in my pre-filed testimony, I noted that between the 2015 ISO New England system-wide marginal CO2 emission rate until the following year, the rate decreased by 2.9% on an average basis. I'm sorry, this is the marginal emission rate.
Okay, do you have any figures for the average?
Not off the top of my head, but I think it's a few percent.
So this is happening even without obviously correcting the system because it hasn't put a shovel in the ground yet, correct?
Yes, it's primarily, I'd say, due to the penetration of renewable resources, both behind the meter and utilities and grid scale.
Okay. This is from what you're... So we've been discussing CLF 15, which is the 2016 ISO New England Electric Generator Air Emissions Report. You were in the room when we started discussing that, weren't you?
Yes, sir.
And I'm going to hand you a copy of that and direct your attention to table 5.5-2 on page 20. Oh, good. So does that help you determine what percentage change occurred between 2015 and 2016 on carbon?
So reading the chart, it looks like in 2015, the emissions were something like a little over 40,000 kilotons, and then in 2016 it dropped down to something under 40,000.
And if you go all the way over the right, does it calculate the percentage reduction?
Now, the scale is in CO2 system emission K-tons.
Okay, well, you see the percentage change column?
Are you on page 19?
22, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry. On page 22. Yes, this is the annual system emissions between 2015 and 2016.
Yes.
ISO calculated that the emission rate percent change was 5%.
Reduction.
Yes.
And what about for SO2? What was the emission rate percentage change?
52.9% reduction.
All right, and NOx?
11.4% reduction.
All right, and this all happened without CREC on the system, correct?
Oh, that's correct. Yes, but other plants did come online. The footprint plant in Salem, Massachusetts, also a plant came online at that time.
Do you have any reason to believe that these reductions will not continue to occur in the near future?
As long as the states continue their very aggressive initiatives to promote energy efficiency, zero carbon resource procurements, and all these things, yes, it will probably continue.
I'm going to be questioning you on your testimony now, and I'm just going to work from the front to the back. Make it a little bit easier. On page 2.
You're referring to the pre-bond test?
Yes. Starting on line 19, you state that you testified before the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities regarding the environmental impact, including greenhouse gas emissions associated with the proposed construction of 3 proposed gas-fired combined cycle plants, correct?
That's correct.
When was that?
Don't remember the year. It was probably 2013 or so.
And who were you testifying for? Who was your client?
The Board of Public Utilities.
And what was your recommendation to the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities regarding these 3 proposed plants?
These were 3 plants that were responded to a solicitation issued by the Board of Public Utilities subject to state law that required the board to solicit contracts for base load or mid-merit gas-fired capacity under the LCAP program, which stood for long-term capacity. I don't remember the rest of the acronym. So these were 3 gas-fired plants. The state was concerned that there would be a shortfall of capacity in the state, and so this procurement was issued. By the way, those contracts were subsequently overturned by the Hughes decision.
Okay.
But the recommendation was that because, again, these would be more modern combined cycle plants, they would be displacing emissions from older coal and oil-fired plants around PJM.
Have you, you've testified in a number of cases, correct? Over a number of years, correct? Have you ever testified against a power plant?
Against the power plant. never testified either before, either for or against a power plant, but rather, reported on findings with respect to what the modeling showed.
So you're not here testifying for or against this plan then?
No.
And I'm assuming you have formulated no expert opinion as to whether or not this particular plan is needed in this market at this time.
That was not my scope, no.
In this case, you're testifying on behalf of the Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources, correct?
Correct.
And this testimony was filed in August of last year, a little over a year ago.
It was filed August 7th, 2017.
Okay. And on page 4, starting on line 21, one of the things that you did with the testimony is to provide a market development update as to changes that have occurred in the past 2 years, correct?
As part of the work that I did on behalf of the OER, we drafted additional data requests to Invenergy, and we asked Invenergy to update their modeling to comport with more recent developments in the market. So,
And you
asked
pointed-
them to update their models.
I'm sorry, sure. So you pointed out in your testimony here at the bottom of page 4, going over to the top of page 5, that there were 4 significant market changes that had occurred in the past 2 years, correct?
Yes.
Right. And I'd like to go through each of the 4 if we can. The first is on the top of page 5, starting on line 1. A decrease in the price of natural gas over the forecast period, and more specifically a decrease in natural gas price relative to coal. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Has that trend, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was comparing the gas prices at the time when the first model was prepared, which I think had a vintage pre-2015. And since then, gas prices have come down, and in fact, delivered gas prices are effectively lower than the price for coal or oil when burned in a power plant.
So you filed this update in August of 17, which is a little over a year ago. And for each of these 4 items, I'm going to ask you the same question. Is that trend that you identified in Roman small 1, is that continuing to date?
Well, prices have pretty much bottomed out. I wouldn't say they're continuing to decrease since 2017.
But they're still at the bottom.
They're relative to when the first analysis was done by Invenergy's consultant.
The second one starts on line 2, and it's an increase in the penetration of new renewable resources over the forecast period, attributable in part to an expansion of distributed renewable generation across the region and pending procurement of renewable resources under long-term contracts conducted by Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, correct?
That's correct, and in fact, there have been additional procurements of renewable resources under long-term contracts since this was made.
Great. I don't even have to ask the second question anymore. The third is an increase in energy efficiency and behind-the-meter solar resources over the forecast period. Is that continuing?
That has continued.
And the fourth is a decrease in forecasted net load as evident by a comparison of the load forecast data in the 2015 Capacity, Energy, Loads, and Transmission CELT report issued by the Independent System Operator New England, ISO-NE, versus the 2017 CELT report. Has that decrease continued?
I haven't lined up the 2017 CELT with the 2018 CELT, but the trend generally has continued.
Okay. The next page, line 6, page 6. At the top, starting on line 1, you were asked if there were any other significant updates to the input assumptions in PA's model. And your answer was the build-out of renewable resources in New England increased by 665 megawatts, 151%, on a nameplate capacity basis in the 2017 model update, reflecting an expected increase in the penetration of renewable resources across the region, correct?
Yes, I compared the model data from the original model with the update that we requested and noticed that difference.
That's a 151% increase. That's pretty significant, isn't it?
Yes.
In fact, that 665 megawatts is larger than the capacity supply obligation that Energy has for Unit 1 at 485 megawatts, correct?
That's correct.
Now, same page, starting on line 5, you looked at Mr. Hardy's testimony about CO2 emission reductions in New England and New York. And at this point, his estimate had dropped down to 0.95%, correct?
On an annual average basis, yes.
And that's for all of New England and New York, correct?
Correct.
And that has since dropped down to, excuse me, 0.89%, correct?
When you say since, you mean in the other model?
In his most recent update, you heard him on the witness stand,
Yes.
and the most recent number that he brought out was 0.89%, correct? Subject to check, if we can.
Yeah, I have a table which I could refer to, but subject to check, yes.
Now, at the top of page 7, beginning on line 1, you stated, if I compare the forecast of total regional emissions of CO2 across New England and New York,
I'm sorry, what?
page 7,
I beg your pardon.
line 1. It might have been my mistake. I apologize. I'll start again. It says, if I compare the forecast of total regional emissions of CO2 across New England and New York between PA's updated model and PA's 2015 model, CO2 emissions decreased by approximately 10% on an average annual basis in the 2017 updated model, regardless of whether CREC was included in the model, correct?
That's correct. System-wide, the region's is decarbonizing.
Decarbonizing even without CREC.
Yes.
Could I just ask, just interject, you just talked about 1,400 megawatts of offshore wind that have been procured in Rhode Island, Mass, and Connecticut. Or in southern New England, you didn't say what states. So this answer receives those procurements, is that right? This answer's from August 2017.
Oh, yes. But the model anticipated those procurements.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So they're included.
If you look on, we asked Invenergy to run, Invenergy's consultant to run the model with different assumptions. And those are summarized in the supplemental advisory opinion on page 11. In a series of data requests, OER asked Invenergy to run the model with different assumptions about what renewables should be included in the reference case. Actually, a better place to look is on page 5 of the supplemental.
You're talking about the OER supplemental advisory opinion.
Yes, OER supplemental advisory opinion on page 5, table 1. There are multiple model cases that were prepared by PA, Energy's consultant, and we asked them to make different assumptions about penetration of offshore wind and new hydropower delivered by new transmission line. And so there are multiple cases.
sorry, Mr. McElroy, I knocked you off track.
No.
But just looking at that, for instance, if I look at it, you're saying, we are instructed in energy to assume that a total of 890 megawatts of new offshore wind would be in service, right? So that would understate what's currently been procured, let alone what's in planning phases.
So on page 7 of my testimony, since this testimony predates the results of the models requested under OER data requests round 4, those models weren't completed until January 2015. So the results of those models are reported in the supplemental advisory opinion, but the pre-filed testimony did not include those updated models and did not assume that amount of offshore.
Okay.
All set? Okay. Could we look at page 7, please? Beginning on line 5. We were asked, why do you believe that the modeled CO2 emissions have decreased across the region between the 2015 analysis and the 2017 update? And you explained you believe there are 3 contributing factors. And for the first one, you said first, from 2015 to 2017, ISO&E's forecast of net load across New England has decreased, reducing the demand for electricity. The decreased net load forecast is due in large part to the increase in energy efficiency and behind-the-meter PV, which is photovoltaic. Dispatchable fossil fuel-fired resources would run less in response to decreased demand for energy, reducing CO2 emissions. You see that?
Yes.
Now, this was filed a year ago. Do you still feel the same way?
Yes.
Thank you. Now I could direct your attention to page 8, please, starting on line 15. In an earlier question, I asked you if you thought that this continued downward trend in CO2 emissions throughout the ISO&E region would continue, and I believe that you said, well, assuming the states continue to push for these things, they probably would, if I summarized your answer correctly. And what I'd like to do is to just read what it says here and ask you if you still feel the same way as you felt a year ago. Beginning on line 15, you stated, I anticipate that clean energy policies of New England states will continue to promote increased development and penetration of renewable resources and energy efficiency in order to achieve states' greenhouse gas reduction targets. As a consequence, over time, the region will rely less on the incumbent fossil fuel resources, including CREC, and therefore CREC's contribution to reducing CO2 emissions will diminish. And end of the quote. Do you still feel that way?
Yes.
If I could direct your attention to page 10. Line 23. You've recognized here that trees and other vegetation sequester or absorb carbon, correct?
Correct.
And on page 11, you actually produced some numbers for the board, starting on line 13. For the kinds of forests that are found in the Northeast, the uptake or the absorption of carbon averages approximately 5.1 short tons of CO2 per acre per year, correct?
That was the calculation I came up with based on some studies that I did not perform, but I found in the literature. There's a lot of variability, but based on a meta-study, this is I thought was a reasonable.
Okay, thank you. Page 21, please. Beginning on line 7, you asked the question, has Invenergy stated whether it will contract for interruptible or firm gas transportation service? And your answer, beginning on line 9, was Invenergy has indicated that it would rely on firm gas transportation service for at least a portion of its natural gas requirements. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Is that still your understanding?
I have not seen any updates to that. That was from Invenergy's application and one of their data responses, so I can't comment on whether that has changed.
Do you know that Invenergy has not entered into an actual contract for firm gas transportation services yet?
I have not been following that. I can't answer that. So you haven't seen a contract for firm gas? I have not.
Do you know how much more expensive a firm gas contract is than an interruptible? On a ballpark.
It's expensive enough that it's unusual for a gas-fired generator to contract for firm transportation.
Since Invenergy has indicated that it would rely on firm gas transportation service for a portion of its natural gas requirements, if the EFSB were to grant a permit for this plan, do you think it would be reasonable for this board to condition the permit on a binding contract for firm gas?
I can't comment on what the direction of the board should be on that.
Okay. Page 22, please. Beginning on line 14. You stated over the long term, as the generation fleet becomes increasingly cleaner and more efficient, energy from CREC will in turn be displaced by more efficient gas-fired plants if they are constructed, and by renewable resources, which have no fuel costs and little to no emissions. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Do you still feel the same way a year later?
Yes, with the important caveat, if they are constructed. If there are future gas plants that are constructed, presumably technology would continue to advance and those future gas plants would be more efficient and displace less efficient generation.
Including CREC if it's less efficient.
Yes.
Page 23, line 2. You're pointing out here that the 2015 air emissions data from ISO indicates that the system-wide marginal emission rate in 2015 was 857 pounds per megawatt hour. And although the ISO NE marginal emissions rate dropped by 9% from 2014 to 2015, it remains significantly above the average CREC emission rate of 760 pounds per megawatt hour on natural gas. Correct?
That is what it says, yes.
And you verified these numbers, correct?
The 760 pounds per megawatt hour is a figure from Invenergy based on how they anticipate the plant to operate. So it includes hours when the plant line operated, duct firing, ramping up, ramping down. So I did not verify that number, but the other values I did verify by comparing by checking the ice and river reports themselves.
Thank you. Page 24, please, figure 2. Actually, what I'm going to do is ask you to look at figure 2, and then I'm going to read starting on line 3. Do you want to refresh your recollection on figure 2?
No, I can see it. I know it's hard to read. It's not well reproduced, but...
No, I can read it too. So beginning on line 3, referring to figure 2, it says it is clear from the figure which is reproduced here as figure 2 that the current emissions are significantly below the 1990 baseline. Importantly, the data demonstrate that Rhode Island is on track to achieve the 2020 emissions reduction target due to the success of current GHG, greenhouse gas, reduction policies and programs, correct?
Correct.
Now, I'm going to look at figure 2, and I can see near the top, slightly to left of center, the 2020 target, which is in the white, which indicates that you're good to go there, right?
That's the target. There's a faint square that's labeled 2020 target.
I see that. And you've already met the target there, correct?
If we're back in, say, 2018, and this figure was produced in 2016. I haven't seen an updated version.
All right, well, on the figure, you've got that target being met, correct?
Based on the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council's analysis, which is what is reproduced here.
All right. What about 2035? Is that emissions reduction under the Resilient Rhode Island Act on target?
So you're looking at the yellow square. That's correct. But this chart is based on a business as usual forecast. So it suggests additional measures would need to be taken to meet the 2035 target.
All right. And with regard to the 2050 target, all the way over to the bottom on the right, also not on target, business as usual, correct?
Business as usual.
All right, page 27, please. Line 10. Starting in the middle, it says Rhode Island and the other states in the region will continue to increase the percentage of energy sold in Rhode Island that is derived from clean energy resources. Thus, the demand for energy from incumbent fossil-fueled resources, including CREC, will diminish. Regardless of how much fossil fuel capacity remains in the region's fleet, CREC's operation would contribute to lowering GHG emissions in the near term until a decreased demand for fossil fuel generation leads to its output being replaced by lower and zero carbon emitting resources in the long term. Correct?
Yes.
And you still feel that way?
Yes. Long term, though, might be very distant future. I'm describing trends that appear from this vantage point to be the direction things are in.
Well, the Resilient Rhode Island Act has a goal in 2035 and has a goal in 2050. Do you consider those goals to be long-term?
Yes.
Okay, now I'm going to move to the statewide planning advisory opinion.
Before you do that, Mr. McElroy, I think there's a typo on the front of both the supplemental and your initial. It says on November 16th, 2016, this was docketed, and I believe that's 2015. And I'm wondering whether, it's not your testimony, Dr. Cool, that you signed. I'm wondering if we need the record corrected on the official document. If you can keep continuing well. You got those, Dr. Bianco? Okay. The first page of the advisory opinion for OER and the supplemental advisory opinion for OER. The lines are not numbered, but it's the, I believe the third sentence in the introduction.
Might this be a good time to take a 5-minute break?
Sounds like a good one.